Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Game On, our high school podcast for Bahakel Sports. I'm Jeff Taylor. That's Jack Taylor. A lot to get to, and we're going to start by, though, telling everybody how they can help support us.
Yes, of course. Obviously, make sure to go to wherever you get your podcasts, whether you watch them, whether you listen to them, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or our website, YouTube, anywhere. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and let us know if there's anything that y'all want us to talk about, anything y'all want us to mention, especially as, the fall sports come to a close and we get ready.
Which is crazy.
Exactly, and we get ready for the winter sports.
Yep, basketball right around the corner. I think our scrimmages coming up. Holiday tournaments, of course, we'll keep you up to date on all that through our social media, through BahakelSports.com and all of that. Of course, we'll be, as we do on our Game of the Week for football, we'll have some Game of the Weeks for basketball. So some stuff to talk about there, some of the moves that have been made coaching-wise and stuff like that. We'll get to that as that rolls along. But football, yeah, I mean, we're down to it.
The last few weeks, still obviously some elongation of the season with everything, that happened with Hurricane Helene. They wanted to allow for schools that were in Western North Carolina, in those counties, to continue to have a full season. And then the ones that were affected here in our area just because of, travel, rescheduling, things like
Who
that.
they had to play.
There's some teams that need it to, stay alive in the playoffs. There's some teams that to even get to the playoffs.
Well, yeah, I mean, I took a look at like somebody like Providence. I mean, I think they've got 3 wins on the year.
3 wins.
And they need 2 more wins would get them there, most likely. So, I think they've got a game this week, and then they end with South Meck the week after that. So they're about 8 to 10 games on the 8th, I guess. But this weekend, this Friday night, a lot of the public high schools wrapping up their year, but of course the private schools, they're kicking off the playoffs. And it's kind of weird, when we talk about the private schools, is it a done deal in terms of who's going to meet, for the championship? I mean, with Providence today and Rabun Gap.
Look, it's almost a moot point. I mean, don't ever count Charlotte Christian out. I'll say that.
I will agree. I agree. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Because I think Providence Day, as we've seen this season, has left a lot of teams still in the game, and not from a matter of saying that they, it's been a close game, but that they could have scored a lot more points. You think about a lot of the issues they've had in the red zone when it comes to penalties, turnovers, what have you.
Yeah, I think a couple weeks ago against Charlotte Latin, they had 4 turnovers inside the 5, and you just normally don't see that, from a team like that. And you go back to when they first kicked off at Bank of America, and they had all of that, all the false starts and all the pre-snap penalties. But it's hard not to think that it's not going to be Providence Day and Rabun Gap.
With their win on Friday, Providence Day secured their 5th straight conference championship, and then Chad Greer became the winningest head coach in Providence Day history, the most wins for that program ever, which is something to be said even just about that school. So it's hard to count them out of anything. They'll be going up against Country Day in the first round. Country Day still, trying to hang with the big dogs.
Right.
They've gotten a lot more weapons offensively, but they're a young team, and with their head coach and with their players, so it will be a dogfight. It's always hard to come into Providence Day and come away with a win. That's not something that many teams are able to do, and so that's going to be where it's going to get tricky. And then you have teams like Charlotte Latin. They started out really, really hot, 7-0. And you can say strength of schedule what you will, but you still have to win a football game.
They're still 8-2.
Yeah, so they're going to have to go on the road to Christ School, and then where Charlotte Christian will be hosting Metrolina. So you've got all of your and then of course Covenant Day in the lower bracket. They're also hosting a game.
I'm gonna throw just something in the loop here because I don't know. Like it says here, and I'm looking at something. Is Christ School 2-4?
Yeah, so that's the thing
But how do they go on the?
So you have your conference. If you have enough conference wins.
Oh, got it. But no, I'm like Charlotte Latin though is going to them.
With the amount of so if they have 2 losses, those 2 losses are in conference. Whereas
I got it.
Christ School has their wins, and their wins are in conference.
Right, got it. Okay.
With this way that the schedule has gone, it's up and down, left and right. Teams having to drop games, non-contests, forfeitures. So it's a real issue. But it's the conference games that matter.
Right.
Not the non-conference games.
So Metrolina Christian will be at Charlotte Christian, and then Country Day, of course, at Providence Day. So the winners of those 2 will meet up in the semis.
Yes.
So it looks like, if you had to put your money down, I guess you're thinking Providence Day and Charlotte Christian. So
you're going to see another rematch. You're going to see a rematch. And then, like last year, and it's the same thing like last year in the first matchup, Providence Day easily was able to handle Charlotte Christian, but then you get to the semifinal, and it comes down to the last drive.
Yeah.
The last drive, the last play. So it's never, something that you can count Providence Day out, but it will seem to be that it's going to go through Rabun Gap. It's going to go to Georgia, regardless of what happens. So Providence Day will have to, if they were to get that far, we'll have to go to Rabun Gap for the second time this season.
Right. And it was not a good trip the first time.
No, it wasn't. I mean, it's been, I think they've played.
Well, they won the state at Rabun Gap last year, right?
They beat Rabun Gap twice last year.
Okay.
They beat Rabun Gap twice last year, both one at home, one on the road.
For the championship.
Yeah. Then lost Rabun Gap this year in the regular season on the road, and they'll be playing them on the road again. But it's very hard to beat a team twice.
Right.
You've got film on them now. You've got, you understand what works, what doesn't. And when it comes to Rabun Gap, you look at that game, and the tail of the box score does not match how they started that game for Providence Day. Providence Day going into that one was a lot closer of a game than it sounded like.
Right.
And when you talk with Greer about that matchup and kind of how it went out, they were up 13-12 starting the fourth quarter in that Rabun Gap game. They were winning by a point going into that fourth quarter. And Rabun Gap turns around to win 49-13. So you talk about your turnovers, you talk about your discipline, you talk about,
that's crazy.
You talk about penalties.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they had them, on the ropes in Georgia.
Right.
And that's where, you can't really count any of these private schools out.
Right.
I mean, it's, when you have the ability to have, free kind of, not transfers, it's not an easier process per se than in public schools, but from what we saw with, even one of Providence Day's players who transferred in from, a public school, then transfers out a few weeks later, and he's playing for the public school that same week. So it's an interesting, dynamic. So I think that because of that, though, you get a lot of talent on these teams. And, Providence Day has the ability to stick around in these games and hold out. It's just a matter of playing a complete game.
Right. And when you talk about playing 48 minutes of good, solid football, complimentary football, and we'll see what happens. So private schools, like I said, they start this week. They'll be done in just 3 weeks, I guess, as they go through the really was the quarters, the semis, and the finals. Let's talk about public schools in just a sec, but of course we want to thank our sponsors, 988lifeline.org. You can call, chat, text 988 at any time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They're for mental health, keeping ourselves mentally healthy, and really over the next couple of weeks we might need that. Everybody stay mentally healthy out there. And then North Carolina Medicaid, we thank them also for jumping on board and help us out and coming on board as sponsors for not only this, but the Blitz. And, of course, this coming Friday night, we'll have the Blitz at 10:30. We will recap all the games for the private schools, and we'll jump in and talk about the public schools, and we'll show those. Our game of the week this coming Friday night is South Meck and taking on Myers Park. And now the interesting part about the public schools as we enter kind of the last week for a lot of them, and then, like I said, a few games will be played on the following Friday night. But it's kind of, is it weird that, like, and we were talking about it before we got going on the podcast, most of the conferences are decided.
And you do tend to see that as you look into it, just with the way that they have the conferences set up.
Right.
The way that it's been, it's not like back in the days with 4AA, 4A, where that last game, more often than not, was going to be a conference championship, depending upon, how many times you saw, when they were in the same conference, a Providence Catholic, you saw a Mallard Creek Huff game. It depends on, all really in the scheduling. And so because of that, you had some, mathematic ways that it could be for the conference championship. Had Audrey Kell won against Olympic, they'd be playing for
that extra point.
They'd be playing for the co-conference championship title, and you have that. But so it's coming down, Palisades, credit to them, undefeated. It doesn't matter what happens. They're, even if they lose this week, they still have the outright conference championship.
Coach Simmons, right?
Coach Simmons.
And what he's done in
3 years.
3 years.
It's their defense. It's a brick wall, and he does something really interesting that when you look at them, they run 6, 7 defensive linemen.
Right.
They don't have a starting 4. They rotate them in. And so then everybody you have in there is playing real minutes and is prepared to play real minutes. And so when you look at,
you can stay fresh like that too. I mean, when you can rotate kids in and out.
Whereas you look at a team like, Audrey Kell, you look at a team like even Providence Day, they only run 4.
Right.
And sure, they might be giant 4, but, they're going to get gassed at some point. So Palisades securing their playoffs. I mean, going to the playoffs after existing for 3 years.
Right.
Is crazy.
I mean, what he's done is impressive, and to get the kids to buy in. I mean, you basically walked into a school that basically you didn't have juniors or seniors really.
No.
How many you had, I don't know, but to start off with, but to do that in 3 years and build that program and win that conference title, and now you got them heading to the playoffs.
Yeah, with they're going to be
a chance to go.
We'll see where their seating are. It's looking like because you also look back at it. The win against Olympic is huge. The win against Cuthbertson is huge for RPI because of the conference that Cuthbertson plays in. It's looking like they might file around to be like a 9 seed going up against a Catholic who would be an 8 seed, depending upon how they file around. Because Catholic's RPI has reduced a little bit with the losses that Butler took. But but the thing is, even Butler took losses to big programs in non-conference.
Right.
So the RPI is really confusing to try to figure out. I know that the NCISAA works their magic.
They do.
But that's what it would look like for Palisades. Would be going on the road to Catholic, which is just going to be a tough matchup regardless. Whereas then you look at a Cuthbertson, they'll be probably staying in conference. They'll be matching up against more than likely a Porter Ridge, who they lost to last year in the first round. But Catholic, they're the outright. We talk about them. They got the outright conference championship.
That's the Southwestern for it.
Because with their win over Independence, which was a huge win, that's going to give them the conference championship. Which, unfortunately, to the disdain of DJ McFadden, it's going to put them probably in the bottom 15.
That's what I'm wondering.
Because you don't have a conference championship. So as far as your seeding goes, you might be sitting around a 19, 20, 21, seeding again. Which,
but hey,
fuel to the fire.
I wouldn't get. I'm not going to. Which they were last year, right?
They were 22, 23.
They're 23. I mean, and he can run with that. I mean, listen, if anybody can motivate his kids and go, hey, we were here last year, we can do it again.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't want to face them. If I'm in that top 15 of the bracket, I'm not going to want to face Independence. But but you talk about some of the matchups, that's kind of, it'll be curious to see the feel of Indy Butler.
Yeah, I will.
Because it's not, it's Indy Butler, but it's not, if that makes sense.
It will be one of the more lopsided Indy Butler games.
And by the way, real quick, kudos to Coach Hales. Jumping in the booth, retired coach, and he jumps into the booth on a Friday night and does our game of the week this past week with Darren Vauda. Kudos to him. He did a great job. We've known Coach Hales for quite some time, and just a great guy. So kudos for his call the other night on our game of the week.
Absolutely. So, and talking about it, because not only are you without Hales, and Glenwood Fairby has done, he walked into it with an incredibly tough non-conference schedule to go,
it was a buzzsaw.
Roseville, Richmond, Irma, Weddington. You're playing, 4 just absolute juggernauts.
Beasts. Yep.
The game that was surprising was Catholic, was the loss against Catholic, where you saw whether or not Keith Emery and Catholic were going to be what they were. You saw it in the Indy game, and you go, okay, they're for real. They're better than you thought. Yep. And then that Butler game was a chance for Butler to say, okay, we're still Butler.
Right.
This year, though, being at Independence, not at Butler, with Independence rolling, DJ's going to have the house, completely filled.
Yep.
So it's going to be a more lopsided game than you've seen in recent years for that matchup, and it will determine. Butler needs that. Therefore, they just got it to. Or no, they had a bye last week.
Right.
So as they sit, they're 4-5. So there's a chance.
So a win may get them in.
A win will get them in.
Okay.
A loss, they could still technically get in. We've seen teams, Hickory Ridge was 3-6 last year. We saw other
Providence a couple years ago went 4-6.
Yeah, we've seen it's not unheard of.
Right.
This will be the last year where that's possible.
Right. With the new conference
when they reclassify and have 8 classes. How that's going to turn the seating and go from not a 64 team field. But so that's going to be an interesting one. And so Butler's going to be playing for their lives. But Indy is it'll be interesting to see what DJ does if he wants to win over them, if, rivalry, or if he sits some players. If he sits, because they have the play,
they're in.
It's a matter of how much.
I think DJ goes hard to go home.
I think he does
I don't think he maybe the last quarter. if they're up big.
It's a matter of how much their RPI for Butler can affect Indy's chances to boost up.
That's true.
If there's a chance for them to get a home field advantage in the first round, I think he will play through the whistle.
Right.
But, because they're all of Butler's wins are all Independence's wins. Butler loses
exactly.
If Butler had beaten Catholic, it'd be one thing. But it's a matter of, because Irmo, I don't know how out-of-state teams affect RPI if they factor in, the South Carolina strength of schedule.
Yeah, I don't.
You talk about Weddington, their conference alone, even a loss to that team, you still get more points to losing to a team that has a tough schedule.
Right.
Same with Roseville and same with Richmond.
Right.
So if their loss, if the RPI that Butler can possess with those losses is enough to boost Independence to a home game for the first round with a win, then yeah, they play through the buzzer. It's a matter. I'll let DJ do that math because I don't even know how to begin to look at that. Then you go, down the line, Huff. They secure that conference again. That's the first.
I saw them against Mallard Creek, and I was just, they brought it. It's both sides of the ball.
It's the first repeat winner, and I believe now for Catholic, if we're looking back at it, I think this is Catholic's first time winning that conference.
I think it is.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's the first time winning that conference. But so Huff is the first repeat that we're seeing in this list of conference championships from this year to last. Palisades and Catholic both being new this year for the winners. So both two first timers.
Right.
Huff, they're the real deal.
Yes.
They didn't drop off at all. And so they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Well, their defense, I was stunned watching them play. They weren't big, but they were fast and they got to the ball.
Yeah.
Mallard Creek could do nothing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of
there's questions about.
Mallard Creek with.
There's questions about the rest of the conference. Mallard Creek, West Charlotte, Chambers. There's real questions about the rest of them. West Charlotte.
Which you went into the season thinking this might be the toughest conference.
Yes,
in the Queen City.
But now, not one of the toughest in the state.
Yeah.
But now, if we're looking at toughest conference, it's pound for pound. It's the Southern Carolina Conference. It's Weddington, Marvin Ridge, Porter Ridge, Cuthbertson, Sun Valley. There's not the entire conference will more than likely make the playoffs like they did last year.
Although Weddington put a hurting on Cuddy this week.
But
this past week,
it's a matter of Cuthberson's. It was definitely Cuthbertson was the toughest defense that Weddington was going to face and has seen all year, and it's just a matter of Weddington. It's like a leaking boat. You plug one hole and water's going to pop out of somewhere else.
Right.
You can only do so much.
Right.
Now I think that and then the attrition sets in. It's one of those things you can hold on for them, hold along with them for so long. But at a certain point in time, if you get gassed, you can't air it out. Right. Cuthbertson has a real problem airing out the ball, and so if you can't do so, then your running attack, which they do have a very intense running attack, it's not going to really matter. Yeah. So that's a big thing. But
and Weddington, the stat that Darren Vaught brought up the other night on our Game of the Week is they've not lost in a calendar year.
this last loss this week against Marvin Ridge, last year against that matchup, that was the first time they lost. That's the first time they've lost since. They hadn't lost a game since playing Butler earlier that season.
You think Andy Capone will have them ready for that? He'll remind them of that?
Honestly, no. When I asked him about it,
really? Okay.
He said, I don't even think about that stuff. He said, the only thing he was thinking about was RPI. And he's like, I don't even really know how to – he said, I don't understand how it works. So, as far as RPI goes –
I just got to keep winning.
He says, he's like, I'm just going to tell them congratulations on this and O, this and O, this and O. Yep. He was telling me they're still trying to find a 10th game.
Right.
Because they have not gotten one. It was a non-contest earlier in the year when they were supposed to be playing. So they are still looking for that 10th game. As they sit at 8-0 right now, they'll be playing Marvin Ridge to go 9-0. That's Marvin Ridge has to come into town to Weddington this year. Last year it was at Marvin Ridge, which gave them that advantage. They're not going to have the case. So Marvin Ridge is going to be looking to play spoilers. No one's gotten it yet.
Nope.
But either way, they've got the conference outright. There's no math because then last year they were co-conference champs with Porter Ridge because of that loss to Marvin Ridge. Now there's no, and it had Cuddy won. Cuddy would have taken the conference championship outright with a win over them, beating the tiebreaker. Now it's not going to matter.
And the fact that every team in that conference could go to the playoffs.
They will.
Is impressive.
They did last year. Every single team in that conference went to the playoffs last year. Cuthbertson and Marvin Ridge losing in the first round, Porter Ridge, Sun Valley losing in the second round, and then Weddington winning the championship.
I forgot about Marvin Ridge. I thought Marvin Ridge didn't go, but you're right.
Marvin Ridge had a stunning game beating Mallard Creek.
Yep, you're right.
It was a crazy game. It was wild, and then losing in the second round.
Okay, I'm getting old and senile because that's actually I remember that's the game I was at.
We go to too many of these games to remember.
Games,
but
I do remember that though. Yeah,
Porter Ridge beat Cuthbertson in the first round, and then Porter Ridge lost the next week. I cannot remember to who. But yeah, Marvin Ridge beat Mallard Creek, which was a shocker to a lot of us. We were surprised about that one. You thought Mallard Creek was going to run the table a little bit when they had, Benjamin Black running literally over people. Then you go to the Metro Conference, though. That's the first that we're seeing of a true conference championship game. You got Lake Norman and Mooresville.
Which I was going to lead into a little bit, too, of, the cool part about the last week or next last week, depending on, where you're at in your schedule, whether you got any, cancellation and stuff like that, is much like, the last weekend of college football. Mm-hmm. It's the rivalries, the local rivalries. So I went to Lake Norman Mooresville game last year and was stunned as I was driving in. There were businesses.
It shuts the whole area down.
Get to the game.
It shuts everything down.
And go ahead there. Sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, but just not only to be for the conference title, but to also be that game.
Which is what it was last year.
Right, which is what it was.
Right. And even around, you see A.L. Brown.
Well, that's what the second one, the bell.
Yeah, the battle for the bell. But this one is, Mooresville has not lost since they lost to Ronald Reagan that second week in the season.
Right.
Lake Norman has had some up and down games, losing to West Cabarrus.
Right.
To allow for the West Cabarrus Mooresville game to be 1-2. They had to fight for every point against South Iredell. And had Tyler Johnson not gone out and gotten injured late in that game this past week, which we still are waiting to see how he is doing and if he's going to be playing this next week for their senior night.
Lake Norman scored in the final minute,
40 seconds, and had Tyler Johnson not gone out, could have been a different.
Right.
They might mount a comeback.
Right.
So Lake Norman had to fight for every inch of that game, whereas Mooresville easily handled South Iredell. Right. So that's going to be It'll be interesting. It depends. Lake Norman has fought a lot of adversity this season: sickness, injuries, rescheduling, what have you. It'll be interesting to see which team
battle tested
Oliphant can bring out there, and because Mooresville and first year head coach Zach Mayo, they run over and they're doing so well to the point where guys like Heel are going under the radar.
To not mention him this year, it's been kind of like, where's he been? But it's like. I forgot the other running back who stepped in when they played Providence, but he had 80 yards in the first half.
But Heels had 11 total touchdowns this season, and it's not been where they've needed. They've been able to air the ball a lot more than they could in years past, which is saying something. Then you go down, Jam Robinson. It's Jam Robinson. They are going to handle that conference, as they did. Northwest Cabarrus held on for a while, but Jam Robinson is going to play to continue to try to get an undefeated season. Another one. They had their undefeated season last year, not losing until the playoffs. Then you go down the line, Crest is trying to, secure that over South Point. Hickory's undefeated. Looks like, they haven't lost a game in, I don't even know how long it's been since they've lost a game. I have to look at that because they had the perfect season last year. And so they're just continuing to run the table. Monroe is undefeated. They'll be going for, again.
Coach Sal's done a great job.
They might be trying to add an extra game in there because they were never able to get it with Porter Ridge. That game never happened.
Well, that's the game that I was at. That they had to stop at 8 minutes in.
And so they never. That was week 2.
That was quite the Friday night with the weather.
That was week 2. So and they never were able to
finish that
get that around. So we'll see what happens there. Corvian Community going undefeated. You can say what you will about the teams they've had to play, but to go undefeated is a
accomplishment. Listen. You play the games that you're presented.
Yeah, and so
win or lose, you play them.
They'll win that conference outright. The big one, Shelby's at Burns. Both teams undefeated. That'll be another conference championship at Burns. So we'll see. How that's going to go. That's going to be an interesting matchup. Then you have another one that's going to shut the town down. And that's Salisbury at North Rowan.
Right.
Both teams sitting tied for first in the conference. Both teams with North Rowan having one loss in conference.
Right.
Salisbury having one loss outside of conference. So that's going to be a huge game that will probably, those two teams are right there, and that'll shut down the whole conference. That'll shut down the whole area as you see those two teams fighting for, both of them are already in the playoffs, but they want that conference title.
Right.
And both teams were in the playoffs last year, so they're going to each coming back, going for blood. And then Northwestern's also undefeated in South Carolina. They'll be they'll be at Indian Land.
Mm-hmm.
They've ran over everybody. They've had, a few close games, but even talking about, that's Huff's only loss this season
was
Northwestern in week 2 of the season. So you talk about how the kind of product they put on the field.
Right.
Paige Wofford has got that on lock. So they'll be, their last season as well. I don't know if South Carolina is going to extend or not. I believe they're just going to be jumping right in.
I think they're jumping right in.
I know there was some issues with traveling, so some teams, had to reschedule, some games couldn't be played, but I think they're just going to jump right in because they were playing, the weeks where everybody else was canceled. So it should be an interesting last week. And then we'll say, we talked about the games that are going to be, Providence, South Meck will be playing for the playoffs.
That following week, the 8th.
East Meck is going to be playing the last week against hosting Piedmont. Cox Mill is going to be at Concord.
Okay.
And Hickory Ridge is going to be at hosting Central Cabarrus. And then a lot in the 3A, in the lower, Crest at Stuart Kramer, North Gaston hosting Kings Mountain.
So a lot of teams are going to have 2 weeks off before the playoffs start.
Week and a half. And I talked to, to Coach Capone about it, and he was like, this is probably the most we've practiced since he's been there as a coach. To think about, they had a span of almost 23 days off, I want to say, when they had, in week 2, when everything was going on, and because it was a forfeiture for AK,
right?
Then you have West Charlotte, but then, West Side gets pushed way, way back. There's the bye the next week, so they think they've had, more practice than ever, and that's where you kind of form your team,
right?
But he said, that's the same kind of thing they're going to go through, treat it like any other week. You're going to have about a week and a half off or so before, you figure out. And that's if they don't get, a 10th game because they're still trying to find a 10th game. So it depends. Some teams might do it.
Nobody's going to volunteer.
No one's going to volunteer. And I don't know how they go about getting that.
We'll see what they can do.
But, yeah, I think it's something where they'll find somewhere to play. And then you've got other teams, in the Catawba Conference will be playing each other. So it'll be interesting, that 8th. Where it was normally, your decision already made, your seating's already put together. Right. Now it's going to be some teams trying to squeak into the playoffs.
And we'll have this, like I said, the semis of the.
And then you'll have the semis of the private schools and the first round of the South Carolina.
Right.
If they don't delay, that'll be the first round of the South Carolina playoffs as well.
Everybody take a deep breath.
Yeah.
It's a go time when we talk about all that. Okay, cool. Before we move on to our final part of the podcast, once again, just thanks to our sponsors, 988lifeline.org. And NC Medicaid, we thank them for jumping on board and sponsoring us and all we do here at Bahakel Sports for high school sports. So, FC didn't quite start the playoffs the way that we wanted to with a 2-0 loss.
Nope.
And, of course, they're playing this coming Friday night, Game 2, Bank of America Stadium. And whether they win or lose, that would be it?
No. So
in terms of maybe playing at home?
Yeah, so okay. Unless Atlanta somehow pulls out a miracle and beats Inter Miami, which with Suarez and Messi, there's no way they do.
Got it.
They're going to run the table on that one, and so then the next round is a straight knockout. The good part about, there was good and bad to the game. It's not aggregate. It doesn't carry over, so they could have scored 8-9 goals.
How much does it hurt losing Pep?
That's huge. And they're going to appeal. They're going to appeal the red because it was a weak red card at that. Watching it, I mean, the contact was negligent, and he was. I mean, they were wrapped up in each other. So it was, he, since they got him on loan, has been a huge presence in the midfield for the FC. He's been like the anchor for a lot of it, and just a really key piece of that team. And so that would be really big, and that's why I'm going to be a little interested to see how many fans are at some of these high school games.
I know
because not.
Go ahead.
I say not only that, not only will the FC be in town for their what will be more than likely the final home game of the season, and the first playoff home game, the first playoff game in Charlotte sports since 2015.
What? Are you serious?
That's been played here in Charlotte since 2015 because the last time the Panthers went to the playoffs, it was on the road.
The only other playoff is the Roval race.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, and so I mean, Independence has gone and some stuff, but on the road as well.
Right.
And then even FC last year was on the road. Not only that, though, the reigning champs of the NBA are coming to town that Friday night, and that's Charles Lee's former team that he came from right off the championship parade. So the Spectrum Center is going to be packed. The Bank of America Stadium is going to be packed, and then you're going to have. So it's going to be interesting to see how many. I'm assuming a lot of these fans will still be, but the FC draws a huge crowd.
It's going to be a raucous night.
The Hornets draw a huge crowd.
So even though this is a high school podcast, people are probably wondering why we were talking about that. Well, the other side of the coin is the ladies, the Carolina Ascent, who right now are taking the Super League by storm.
Blowing everyone out of the water.
Yeah, undefeated, doing a great job there. Coach Poole was doing a great job. Got a lot of veterans, but he also has some youngsters.
Yeah.
And one of them is a 14-year-old by the name of Stella Spitzer. I had a chance to talk to her and the coach, get to know a little bit about her. She actually made history a couple weekends ago when she became the youngest player to ever play in a USL Super League game for the Ascent. And here's how that conversation went.
Stella Spitzer is coming onto the field. The 14-year-old from Columbus, Ohio, is onto the field for the first time in the USL Super League.
I was really excited. I think the environment was so great, and all of my teammates around me supporting me. It was a really fun experience to be able to have at such a young age, and I think everything will just go up from here.
This past Saturday night, this 14-year-old entered the game for the Carolina Ascent and also entered the record book for this league. Stella Spencer became the youngest player ever to be on the field and compete in a USL Super League matchup.
I just look at it as another opportunity to do something I love, because if I look at it as like my age, then I think I'm just going to get too focused on the media and the headlines, and I think it's just really important to focus on what I came here for.
That focus has certainly not been lost on Stella or her head coach.
She's naturally so talented, so technical, very determined, very committed. And you take a chance on some of these aspects of a young player, but I think the point that we knew we had something really special was when she gathers the respect and gains the respect of the senior professionals.
And records or not, Stella says leaning on her teammates will only help her continue to grow in the sport she loves.
Obviously, this is my first time in a pro environment, and if I have any questions or any help, if I need anything at all, I can always go to them, and they're always there for me.
So 14 years old.
That's crazy. That's insane. Not even in driver's ed yet, or maybe just starting driver's ed.
And we didn't say it in the story, but she's homeschooled, so she literally wakes up. She wakes up like in the morning, has breakfast, goes to practice, does a lift or whatever the Ascent needs, then goes home and does about 5 to 7 hours of school.
That's wild.
Which is crazy. So kudos to her. The interesting part, too, about the way the Super League works is the way those contracts work is normally when you sign your pro contracts or whatever, you're done in terms of your amateur status. That's not how the Super League works. They have a clause in there somehow that says you can come play. It's just part of how they grow that league, and it's awesome. But those girls don't lose their shot at finishing high school and going to play college ball.
And they take a huge break in the middle of their season. They split the season up in two, so they take, I think, a few months off.
Right.
So I think one of their last home games is going to be coming up these next few weeks, and then they won't be playing again until I think it's like March or,
I think
or,
the middle
or May.
Of March. Yeah, I think it's the middle of March. I think
they take a huge gap,
which I didn't know that either. That's crazy.
To allow for because a lot of those players, they're in either coming out of college, playing in college still, going back and forth. So the age range is different definitely than the MLS, because in the MLS it's a lot of an older league where they do take international breaks, and a lot of players are on loan so that they can go play for their international squad or go play for somebody else, like we've seen with Karol Swiderski, like you've seen with Kamil Wozniak. So it's very cool to see though.
And talking to Stella, I asked her, I said, there's college and all of that, and her reply was, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean,
she's like, hey, maybe this is the deal. Maybe, my pro career goes from here.
Yeah, it easily could.
And kudos to her, but I still just 14.
That's wild.
That's crazy. And I watched some of her game that she got into, whatever, and she held her own. And the cool part was talking to, the head coach and the other players, how much respect they have for her. As a 14-year-old, and they view her as a teammate, not a youngster, but somebody who can contribute. So kudos to her. So hey, that is it for this episode of Game On. Thank you so much for taking some time to check in with us. As always, however you get your podcast, whether you listen or watch, make sure you follow us, subscribe, comment. We love to hear from you guys. If there's a great story you have out there, high school wise. Email, or otherwise. Email Jack or myself here at the station. We love telling these stories, and we love doing what we do, especially on the high school level. So until next week, have a great week. Enjoy your Friday nights. Enjoy all the other sports that are out there as they start to wrap up the fall season, and we will talk to you next week.